Well, let's kick things off. Good morning to everyone on the western and central part of the country. Good afternoon to East Coast folks. Welcome to our Sierra Club Forum. I'm Ben Avery. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Senior Director of Chapter Fundraising here at the Sierra Club. Hello, Edna from North Carolina. Nice to see you. Hello, everyone else who's joined in too from across the country. So I'm going to be your host of today's discussion. This gives Sierra Club members and supporters like all of you a chance to hear directly from our staff and partners about our work to protect clean air, clean water, the climate, wild places, and equitable access to the outdoors for all. I'm speaking to you today from Twisp, Washington, which is ancestral homeland of the Methow and Okanagan tribes. For those of you who haven't visited or know where Twisp, Washington is in the Methow Valley of Washington State, or just east of North Cascades National Park. Great place to visit, especially this time of year. So for those of you who joined forums in the past, we usually spend a lot of time discussing our nationwide work. Today is going to be a little bit different. It is special. We are going to take you for a dive into a few of our Sierra Club chapters across the country. So why are we doing that? I think when it really boils down to it, I have to tell you all, I've worked here for 15 years now, and I can vouch for the fact that the heart of this organization lies in our chapters across the country. It's where I see probably one of the things that is the most special about this organization. We have incredible volunteers who are doing work that in almost any other organization would have to be done by paid staff. They're doing it in collaboration, in most cases, with our local staff. So for those who don't know, we have a chapter in every state and in Puerto Rico and DC, a few more in California, but that's another story. And they're best known, our chapters are best known for their lobbying at the state level, some really cool outings that happen across the geographies that they represent, and locally focused campaigns that happen at the city level, the county level, the statewide level, in whatever state or region they represent. So as you can imagine, we have a ton of cool stories going on all the time at different chapters. But today I want to share a few of the most compelling stories of the year. And as you'll find out, these are stories that are locally focused, but have implications for all of us across the country. We're going to jump into Massachusetts, Michigan, and Texas in just a minute. And fortunately, you're not going to have to hear those stories all from me. I have an incredible panel with me today, and I'm excited to jump right in. We'll do about 20 to 30 minutes worth of guided discussion with the three panelists, and then we're going to leave plenty of time to hear from all of you and do some Q&A. Thank you to everyone who's already chatting in via the chat function, the Q&A box. Please go ahead and do that. We'd really like to know that you're on and engaged with us. I'm loving to hear where people are from. Hello, everyone who's already chatted in. You're welcome to enter questions whenever you want for the panel. For the first 20 or 30 minutes, we're going to kind of park those to the side, but we will get back to them. And thank you to everyone who chatted in questions ahead of time when they registered for this. We're going to get to those as well. But let's get into it. Let's meet our panel for today. Let me first introduce Vina Dharmaraj from our Massachusetts chapter. She is our Director of Transportation. She is fresh off an international trip in Turkey as of yesterday. So we give her a ton of credit for joining us. Vina, welcome on. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm really excited to be here today with my fellow chapter colleagues. And after over a decade of work leading multi-stakeholder environmental programs in India, my journey at Sierra Club started as a volunteer at the Massachusetts chapter. When the opportunity to drive efforts in the transportation sector came up, I joined the chapter as a staffer to work on transit electrification. A lot has changed since then. Our work has really grown over the last few years. And today I lead efforts to expand clean mobility options, including transit, walking, biking, and vehicle electrification through policy advocacy, grassroots mobilization, and coalition building. And I'm looking forward to talking with you much more about this.
Great, thank you, Vina. And welcome back to the States. Dave, let's go down to Texas. Let me introduce Dave Cortez, our director at the Lone Star chapter, which covers the state of Texas. Dave, good morning. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning, yo, Dave Cortez, he, him pronouns. I'm in occupied Coahuiltecan and Lipan Apache lands, otherwise known as South Austin. For those of y'all who know Austin, I was in Barton Springs for 2 hours yesterday morning. I'm taking a week off, but I'm happy to join you all today and chat about our work. Shout out to the other Texans on the call, saw you in the chat. I'm born and raised from El Paso, Texas. Grew up in the shadow of a copper smelter that poisoned my entire community. And I'm fortunate to continue to do this work with people from El Paso and every corner of Texas for clean energy, environmental justice, and climate justice. And we'll talk more about it soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. And last but not least, Christy Mcgillivray from our Michigan chapter. Christy is our legislative director out there. Christy, welcome on and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I see folks from Saginaw and folks from along the shoreline in Lake Michigan. So hey, Kate and Catherine, I saw your names. It's great to see you here. I am actually originally from Alabama. That's where I grew up. My parents moved to the Detroit area to work for the Detroit Symphony Orchestra when I was in high school. I bounced around a lot. I've lived in New York, overseas in Scotland, and also in Australia. I started working as an advocate for clean water action in 2004. I've done a lot of other stuff, went into education, went into union organizing, worked to organize charter schools in Detroit. And I went back into the classroom, and Sierra Club Michigan actually called me up because of past work I had done with them when I was working with Clean Water Action. And they got me out of teaching chemistry and physics. So I joined the chapter in 2019. Really glad to be here.
I told you we had an interesting panel. Okay, so I want to start by giving you all a sense of the stories that we're going to hear about today. So we're going to bounce around the country, and I'm going to ask the panelists to give you a sense of kind of what they're facing, what the goals are, and some of the strategy behind how we're attacking the challenges that we have. So let's go to Dave down in the heart of Texas. I think you all remember the gripping news and some of the imagery that came out with the grid failure last winter. So Dave wants to give you a little bit of an update on what that work looks like now for the chapter and where things stand. So Dave, take it away.
Yeah, I think it's a grounding for everybody. Just when you think about Texas, you have to think that there's people that have been fighting here for a better world for generations. My people, my ancestors, my ancestral homeland in West Texas, Balmorhea, you know, our people go back many, many centuries to these lands. And there are many people who've migrated to Texas over the last century that are trying to protect the water, protect the land, protect the air for their children in our communities. And so what you see on the news, and I know we're like the butt of every joke in the world, sometimes it feels like, and there's a lot of horror here. There's so much good happening. And I'm really excited to be part of the movement here, specifically on this grid work. The night that the grid went down, I'll never forget the sound of my baby girl. She was not even 2 yet, and her nightlight and her sound machine went off, and the temperature was in the 40s in the house. And she was crying. We scrambled. We were prepared. We got her stuff turned back on, and then it was like, wow, what are we going to do for the next few hours? Next few hours turned into the next day. And then it started to seem like, oh my God, this could actually go on for quite a long time, and we're not prepared for that. I will forever hold those feelings in my heart, in my work with my staff and with the communities I work with, because that should never happen. And there's specific people that are responsible for it. It just so happens they're the same people that are polluting our air. They're the same people that are watering down and taking away our democracy by restricting voting rights and making it harder to get our voices heard at the ballot box. And then the same people that are just building fossil fuel infrastructure throughout the state. So we believe the frontera, the border, Texas, and the Gulf Coast and the Gulf South are not sacrifice zones. We're advocating for a better world for our communities. And whether it means additional oil and gas leases in the Gulf Coast that we're going to fight and organize against, or stopping flaring in Houston or in Odessa in the Permian Basin that's hurting people's lungs, we're going to organize for that better world. And at the chapter, that's really what we're bringing to the table. I've lived a long time fighting the bad things. We've been successful, but we know that we can't build the movement we need to transform policy, to transform local decision-making without focusing on the vision for a better world. And so we talk about building the good at the Lone Star chapter. We're going to fix the grid with people-centered investments in energy efficiency, local solar, community solar, and demand response. But all those things are fought by the same people that caused that blackout, the same people that failed to weatherize the gas infrastructure, same people that fought regulations to weatherize power plants, the same people that flared in uncontrolled amounts when the grid went down, or when Hurricane Harvey hits, or any other disaster hits. So we're shining a light on that fossil fuel influence, if you will, or corruption in certain contexts. And we're helping people learn how to read their bills. We're helping people learn how to advocate for lower energy bills, show them who's responsible for that decision, that their bill went up because of the winter storm, or because we're suffering a record heat wave here, again, another climate crisis storm. And we're going to empower people from Brownsville to Port Arthur, Texas, to the Panhandle, to El Paso and Laredo, and in between, to make decisions about their energy future for themselves. And I'm really excited the way it's going. We're having a lot of progress. Our goal is to get 10,000 activists engaged this year. We're halfway there, but we've got some big mobilizations coming up. And so when you see Texas, you see a former friend and former council member of mine, Beto O'Rourke, running for governor. He's got the same energy that I'm talking about and that our people are talking about. We're here for a better world and a better community. So really happy to share more and answer any of your questions later.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Let's head east and north to Massachusetts. Vina, I'm not going to steal your thunder. There's a lot going on, some really cool news going on in Massachusetts. Just you give us the story. What's going on? What's the latest happening up there?
So we had a big victory in Massachusetts recently, and I'm so excited I get to share this with all of you. So earlier this month, Massachusetts passed a comprehensive climate bill that included provisions on offshore wind, clean energy, buildings and transportation electrification. Naturally, I am especially excited about the transportation provisions because it included several priorities that we've been fighting for a very, very long time. Some key highlights of the transportation provisions are like the bill, for example, requires our largest transit agency, the MBTA, to have an all-electric bus fleet by 2040. And it prioritizes the deployment of these electric buses on routes that are transit dependent. It bans the sale of new gasoline or diesel-powered cars starting 2035. There are also a number of measures to expand access to electric vehicles. So the bill increases consumer rebates to $3,500 for new and used light-duty electric vehicles that cost $55,000 or less. It offers an additional $1,000 for residents who trade in a gas-powered car. And there's an extra $1,500 rebate for low and moderate income residents. So that's a pretty comprehensive package that takes care of so many different aspects of electric vehicle access. And further, it authorizes the state to offer these rebates at the point of sale and directs the creation of a new outreach program for underserved and low-income communities. And these are the very communities that often do not benefit from policies like this. So I'm very happy to see that included in the bill. To address the gap of charging infrastructure, it creates an interagency coordinating council to oversee the deployment of public chargers in an equitable and accessible manner. The bill also will help regional transit authorities across the state to develop fleet electrification plans, and it directs state agencies to study both the challenges as well as the opportunities for electrifying our school bus fleets. I won't go into all the minute details of the bill. There are many, but lastly, I just want to highlight that it also requires the state to oversee vehicle electrification as well as emission regulations for transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. We've seen, Uber and Lyft expanding in so many of our states, and a lot of the pollution that we see localized come from ride-hailing companies. While this bill is not perfect, I would say it advances several provisions that help make our transportation system and communities cleaner. It took years of advocacy, collaboration with partners, countless meetings with legislators, policy briefings, working through several iterations of the bill all through the legislative session, and a lot of grassroots mobilization to get to this point. This is a big win for sure, but our work is not done yet. I'm looking forward to continuing to build on this momentum and to push for policies that will further expand clean mobility options for all. So this is big news. Very excited that I get to share this with you.
And somehow the Republican governor signed it, despite a little bit of a last-minute worry.
Yes, we had quite of a nail-biter finish. We literally had to push him to sign it, and he signed it on the very, very last day. So it was definitely a nail-biting finish.
Awesome. Well, we're going to hear a little bit more about what the future holds for that, because great to have legislation passed, and then there's the implementation, which presents all kinds of fun challenges. Okay, let's go to Christy in Michigan, who has one heck of a story to tell us about a local issue, quote unquote local issue, that has become far more than a local issue. So Christy, tell us what's going on with this Enbridge fight.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So I don't know how to keep this as short as I need to keep it. So if anyone is intrigued by this, please follow up. But I want to outline the stakes of our fight first, so that the details I give you are put on this framework of the power dynamics that we're talking about here. What's at stake is enforcing the first shutdown mandated by activist pressure ever of an existing fossil fuel pipeline. So we have the industry that is driving climate chaos versus the actual democratic rule of government. And I'm going to go into details about why that's the case. In 2010, one of the largest inland oil spills ever in the United States happened here in Michigan, and it triggered for everyone who's working in Michigan on climate and water issues that this Canadian oil transport company, Enbridge, has a pipeline network all over the state. After investigating their network, we found that they were operating a pipeline that was only engineered to last for 50 years and was built in 1953 under the Straits of Mackinac. That is where Lake Huron and Lake Michigan meet. It is one of the most dynamic places in the world in terms of freshwater ecosystems. It's highly unstable. The volume of water that moves back and forth through the straits is 10 times larger than the amount of water that moves over Niagara Falls, to give you an idea of the scale. And this pipeline is a ticking time bomb. So for those of you that are not from the region, some idea of the scale, we're talking about 700 miles of freshwater coastline, drinking water for 40 million people, tribal treaty rights, and specifically the tribal treaty rights that were first upheld by the United States Supreme Court in the 1972 Gurneau decision. 24 state parks, 7 national parks, the Huron National Marine Sanctuary, First Nations in Canada, including Walpole Island and the Manitoulin Islands, and a regional economy that is worth, I believe, $6 trillion, and an oil spill response in the Straits of Mackinac would require shutting down the Soo Locks, which is the international shipping lane that allows this entire region to function as the interconnected economy that it is. So the scale of catastrophe is really big, which is part of the reason why we won. We made one mistake. We did not count on the actual power of the largest fossil fuel transport company in the world being brought to bear on our state. So you might have noticed we got the shutdown order in 2020. It's 2022. Enbridge is violating the law. The state of Michigan is attempting to seize their assets for every day that they are operating illegally at this point. And Enbridge is using its unlimited resources to fight this because they know the stakes. They know what's at stake. This could be the first existing pipeline that starts the shutdown of fossil fuel infrastructure, and Enbridge is going to the wall to fight it. They've invoked an international treaty that's never been invoked before. They've started lobbying the State Department. They've started lobbying the Senate. They are pushing hard to fight this shutdown order, which is why the stakes have ratcheted up, and it is now a national and international fight.
I think you did a pretty good job of framing that, Christy. That's a big story, and there's a lot to it. We're going to come back to that in a second. So I hope you all are listening now have a sense of kind of what's at stake here. I want to go back around the panel and talk about what the future holds in the short to medium term. And if any of you want to go a little bit further than that, please do. But we're probably talking the next, at least the rest of the year, probably into early next year. Dave, let's go back to you in Texas. You were telling this pretty interesting story about empowerment across the state. Tell us what you see happening in the not too distant future. What are your goals for what's ahead?
Yeah, well, our major goal is to expand the base of community members and Texans who are involved in this work. In my experience, my work, my background, my training as a community organizer, I know that we can reach more people on consumer-focused issues. So we're really leaning into the fact that this record heat wave that we had, unprecedented amount of heat in Texas this summer, is going to cause people's bills to skyrocket, and it's already happening. Those bills will be coming in over the next month, and we're talking, working Texans, people who are already struggling. On top of that increased bill from the heat, we've got surcharges from the winter storm and surcharges from the Texas legislature that just socialize the cost of the storm onto ratepayers. And folks don't know why this is happening. And the least we can do is give them guidance on one, here's how you get immediate relief. In Austin, for example, our organizers are helping people learn how to downsize their waste bins, get an extra recycling bin, lower their main garbage bin. That can save people like $30 to $40 a month right there. Those opportunities exist around the state. And then we'll talk to them about applying for energy efficiency and weatherization. We'll talk about customer assistance programs. And unfortunately, it's probably going to get to the point where we need to call for a moratorium on utility shutoffs again. That happened in the pandemic. It happened after the winter storm. People are having a hard time. We're going to turn all of that education into power, though. That means that we want people to learn about their local utility, what the board is that governs it, what the city council's role is in that. We call it's in the spirit of energy democracy, helping people have more agency about how these decisions are made. And it gets even more exciting as we get into Dallas and Houston and other areas where you pick your phone provider, you pick your electric provider like you do a phone. It's like AT&T or Verizon or whatever, and people have even less agency there. And the prices have doubled in 1 year in Texas for retail electricity. So we got a lot of concern and a lot of work to do. We're working across multiple organizations, not just environmentalists, to build this education and get the word out over the next 3 to 6 months.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Vina, I already sort of alluded to the fact that you passed the bill. It's incredible. We're all celebrating. What happens next? This implementation is going to start to roll out. Is that what you're thinking about? Is there something else on your mind in the short term? What's on your mind in terms of pushing this forward?
An immediate priority for us is ensuring that the legislature provides the funding that is necessary to implement all the transportation provisions that are there in the bill. Unfortunately, a parallel economic development bill that included $150 million in funding for both the electric vehicle consumer rebate program as well as the charging infrastructure deployment fund was stalled at the end of this legislative session. So our legislative session ended, the end of July, and it got extended a little bit to the first couple of weeks of August. So our main aim is now to push the legislature to take up this funding piece by the end of this year or very early in the next session. Also in July this year, Massachusetts adopted its Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2025 and 2030. And this plan sets the sectoral emission reduction limits, including for the transportation sector, and it outlines the policy portfolio for the state to reach these climate goals. This legislative victory that we have with the climate bill advances several of the policies to reduce transportation emissions that were identified in the state Clean Energy and Climate Plan. So in the longer term, our focus will be to monitor and influence equitable implementation of the transportation provisions in the bill, as well as the strategies in the Clean Energy and Climate Plan. So both of them are tied to each other, and this is an opportunity for us to link both of these and make sure that the implementation is something that happens in a way that is equitable and the positive impacts of it reach all regions of Massachusetts. We'll also be advocating very actively for the use of federal dollars that are available through both the bipartisan infrastructure law as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. and continue to build grassroots power to create a climate resilient transportation system that works for everybody. As Dave mentioned earlier, it's all about building people's power, making sure that the word gets out to as many people in the state, whether they are our members, our supporters, or others that are working for other environmental organizations. Finally, we will keep fighting for priorities that did not make it into the bill. We will push for bold targets to electrify our commuter rail, our school bus fleets, our medium and heavy duty vehicle fleets, as well as municipal fleets that didn't actually get addressed in the climate bill that the state passed. We'll also be looking to expand transit options across the state, because that's the way where we reduce, that's a way where we can reduce significantly emissions from the transportation sector by making sure that people are moving to transit instead of their personal vehicles. And we're also looking at advocating and making sure that the state legislature passes a low-income fare program for transit users, as well as a fare fee bus program, and definitely to expand safer biking and walking infrastructure. So we've pretty much got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, that's plenty on your plate. It's a familiar story, right? An incredible bill passes, just like we saw at the federal level, and we still have a lot of work to do to fix the bad, make and push some stuff forward that wasn't included. So a very familiar story. Christy, you alluded to this has become a much bigger fight than just Michigan. So tell us what's ahead for you all in this battle.
Sure. So I saw in the chat, folks are asking how they can help. Well, just so happens, there's a virtual hearing tomorrow being held by the Army Corps of Engineers on whether or not Enbridge should be allowed to build an oil tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac in order to justify the continued operation of their pipeline as a part of their justification for continuing to defy the shutdown order. So a part of our work to enforce this shutdown order is going to be defeating this tunnel. Please, everyone on this call, I see 163 people here. Everyone needs to be there. Everyone needs to submit public comment. This needs to ratchet up significantly in order to outweigh the power that Enbridge wields. However, I want to be very clear that we are doing something that has never been done, which means a court has never forced an oil company to shut down a pipeline. We've stopped them, we haven't shut them down. We've never seen a permitting process force a shutdown because it's never happened. So we are in truly uncharted waters. And what we need is we need the full weight and authority of the United States federal government in order to actually take on the largest fossil fuel transport company in the world, which means we need President Biden to care and make this a priority. And that office needs to figure out what kind of power play needs to happen within the authority of the federal government to force a Canadian oil company to comply with our laws and mandates from our democratically elected officials. So we're going to use these processes like the Army Corps process and news about the court outcomes to drive participation, build a list, drive communications, tell this story. Dirty Fuels is getting involved. Look for information from Dirty Fuels. Everyone is now a stakeholder, including Canadians, because this is international waters. So everyone is currently a stakeholder and a constituent. We have to significantly ramp this up. And the goal in intervening in all these little processes that have never actually achieved the outcome that we're going for is to build the list and real political power so that the Biden administration will have the strength and the fortitude to take on a very, very big player.
Thank you, Christy. We did share a link in there, but we will definitely share a link for the hearing that Christy referenced with you during this call and after as well. So believe me, you will have the invitation to get there, and thank you for considering that. Okay, we are creeping up to the end of our panelist time, but I want to go around one more time because I want to talk about impact, right? Like we could talk about the fights and they're really, they're fascinating and the details are very interesting. But of course, why does this really matter, right? Like, what are the implications to our people, our land? And in particular, I'm going to ask the panelists to even draw out a little bit and think about nationwide and international impact that the work is having, right? Because it's easy to think about local, but When we pass a big climate bill in Massachusetts, it affects all of us in a way. So Dave, can I go back to you first? Can you talk a little bit about, you've already done such a nice job talking about the communities, but maybe put a little bit of a finer point on the impact of this on people in and out of Texas?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest theme, everyday Texans, working Texans, communities of color, indigenous folks, folks just trying to get by in this state, we're given the short end of the stick. There are nuances and more acute struggles amongst working class communities of color, particularly in some of the poorest counties in the country on the border. When I say frontera, I mean the border, where poverty is rampant. The Rio Grande dried up this year. The drought was intense. We're grateful for the rains that we've been blessed with in the past few weeks. But we have multiple intersecting crises happening at the same time in this state. It's very difficult for people to find hope in advocacy. I saw Melanie in the chat saying, when the power went down last year, the big fossil fuel export companies kept running. They kept getting their resources to export abroad. The downtowns of buildings in buildings were lighted. There's a bold, broad illustration of inequity here. And our biggest challenge is just trying to cultivate and stoke the fires of hope. Uvalde hit us all culturally and emotionally very hard. Other issues, attacks on women's access to healthcare and abortion, attacks on the ballot box, all kinds of oppressive changes to our laws really hit people and make it just really difficult to go to a committee meeting, go testify, issue a comment. And so that's why we're going to just really stay focused on helping people in their pocketbooks, helping them with their air advocacy, that they can breathe clean air and have access to clean, affordable, if not free, water in this state. Because the regime that's been in power for the last 22 years here has really failed everyday Texans. And so talking about hope is going to get us very far.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Vina, same question to you. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of this?
Definitely. Thanks, Ben. So transportation is the largest source of carbon pollution in Massachusetts. It accounts for approximately 42% of climate disrupting emissions in the state. It is also the leading source of local air pollution that disproportionately impacts environmental justice populations. And this is because they're more likely to be located near major highways or marine terminals or trucking corridors and other distribution hubs. So you're not only getting impacted by the climate impacts of fossil fuels, you also are facing the public health impacts of these decisions. So even short-term exposure to toxic vehicular exhaust and particulate matter has been shown to have adverse health impacts and increase the risk for respiratory and cardiovascular disease. We have a study that was done by the Union of Concerned Scientists here in Massachusetts that showed us that on an average, residents of color in Massachusetts are exposed to vehicular pollution that is 26 to 36% higher than the exposure to white residents. And that's a lot. So at every step, it is important that we evaluate our policy, our strategy, the tactics that we are using through an equity lens, and that we continue to work in collaboration with those who are directly impacted the most by this pollution. So every policy win that is both big and small have real world impacts. This legislative win will mean lower air pollution and better public health outcomes, especially in communities that have the greatest pollution burdens out here in Massachusetts, places like Springfield, Chelsea, even areas of Boston. The climate bill includes environmental justice provisions that only begin to address the unequal impacts of climate change. For example, the climate bill has higher rebate levels for low and moderate income residents. You have provisions that calls for ride-hailing electrification programs to minimize the negative impacts on low-income drivers. These are all steps in the right direction, but we need to be doing so much more. So this victory in Massachusetts, I would say, helps set a precedent and inspire climate action in other states, hopefully. In our work in Massachusetts, when we are advocating for policy that we would like to see, lawmakers often want to know if the policy has been implemented in some other place. And, it always helps when you can point to examples from other states or even other countries. And so this is just a start. And I think we've got a long way to go.
Awesome. Thank you, Vina. And Christy, you did such a nice job of talking about the stakes at the beginning of when you were talking about the problem. Anything else you want to add to that? Maybe international stakes, anything else?
Yeah, I want to, I mentioned briefly tribal treaty rights, and it was brief in part because it's not appropriate for me to talk about tribal treaty rights and talk about the stakes for the tribes here in Michigan. But I didn't mention that when Governor Whitmer issued her shutdown order, she invoked the 1836 Washington Treaty, and she referred to tribal treaty rights. And that was the first time the state of Michigan has ever publicly acknowledged treaty rights that they have to honor. So on top of the fact that we're talking about treaty rights that were upheld by the United States Supreme Court for the first time in 1972, we're talking about the first time that the state of Michigan has publicly acknowledged taking action in support of tribal treaty rights. So we are going to share a recording of a recent long-form interview that includes President Gravel from the Bay Mills Indian community. And I will really encourage all of you to listen to President Gravel talk about what's at stake for her community. And I also, I think we often get referred to as flyover country. So I wanted to take a quick second to share a few photos about what is at stake for me. So I think that I can just do that, right? I'm going to click share screen. Okay, so we'll go here. And so I think that everyone, apologies for the sound, that was not planned. This is going to loop for a little bit. I'll talk through it. This is Lake Huron. This is a beach that I paddle to with my daughter. That's my daughter, Edith. That is a photo of her on the day that Governor Whitmer issued her shutdown order. And I think, for me, Edith was with me here at this Enbridge eviction. So what this means for me is that my daughter will have stood in solidarity with tribal nations and see us win. So I want that feeling we had the day that Governor Whitmer issued her shutdown order. I want Edith to live through enforcing that and understand that when we fight, we win, and we can take on very powerful interests and outweigh them with democracy. So I will leave it at that.
Awesome. Thank you, Christy. I want to go to that beach. That's like beautiful. Okay, folks, we have 20 minutes. I'm just holding the space for you all, our audience. So thank you for listening so far. Thank you for everyone who's chatted in questions. I'm going to start scrolling through and see if there are any that are unanswered that we can get to. Thank you to everyone who chatted in questions ahead of time. If you have them, now is the time. Please chat them into the Q&A box. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. I'm going to bounce some questions around. Dave, I'm going to come to you first because I think having not lived in Texas, the way you made it sound in terms of the menu of options that people have sounds pretty complex. Robert from the chat asked a question earlier about the fossil fuel alternatives that might work in Texas long term. I'm just wondering if you could talk about that, maybe even the choice that folks have at the moment to buy into that or to choose that in some way to power their homes. Can you just talk a little bit about long-term alternatives in Texas?
Yeah, well, I think, think of Texas, mostly 90% of its residents, our neighbors, are in that power to choose market. You pick a company. Austin, San Antonio, Denton, Texas, Brownsville, Texas, and a couple of other smaller towns in some electric co-ops. We have government-run energy utilities. So like we have a public utility in Austin. That gives us a lot more agency to say we want equitable community solar that doesn't raise people's bills, and we have a city council that oversees that utility. So there's a lot more democracy weaved into that process, a lot more opportunity for us to get different programs rolled out, like demand response, increased budgets for weatherization, et cetera. But for 90% of Texans, they don't have that. We rely on Governor Abbott and his appointees in various state agencies. You might have heard in last year, George P. Bush, who's our land commissioner this year and last year, he refused to distribute federal Hurricane Harvey relief money to Harris County, to Houston. They got a big donut, $0, and it all went to areas where they wanted to build political influence. That's the kind of dynamics we're dealing with when it comes to state administered programs, but we're hitting them hard on that. We're not letting them get off. We're engaging the Public Utility Commission to expand requirements for energy efficiency. The cleanest form of energy, as you all have heard before, is the kind you don't have to use. And the state of Texas is not investing in reducing demand for working class people. They'll pay Bitcoin miners, they'll pay big industrial polluters to reduce demand, but they won't pay us. They won't pay our neighbors. So we're going to laser in on that. Texas is a leader in utility scale wind, and will be soon, sorry, California, in utility scale solar. And honestly, that's the thing that has kept our grid alive this past summer. We came very close multiple times, again, to another blackout. And clean energy and energy efficiency and demand response are the only things that really save the day. So more of that stuff will help us out. Check.
You had me scared when you said 90% of us rely on Governor Abbott and his buddies. That's a terrifying thought. Christy, there's a question that just came in on the chat that I think is actually just fundamental to understanding pipelines and why they're so important. So the question from Terry, what happens to the oil that goes through line 5, right? Talk about the volume. Sounds like it's pretty high. Right. How much does Michigan use of that oil? Does it go straight through? Could you just tell us a little bit about the background there?
Enbridge, again, largest fossil fuel transport company in the world, uses Michigan as a shortcut and uses the Great Lakes as a shortcut. Almost all of their product goes to Sarnia, Ontario, which is right across the river from Marty Habilevsky, who is also in the chat. So for those of you that are not familiar with Canadian geography, Sarnia is really the equivalent of the Gulf Coast refineries in Canada. So it also poses a very direct health threat to everyone living near it. And the product goes there, and then it is refined, it is shipped further up to Montreal, and then goes to international markets. So Michigan is not dependent on it. The United States is not dependent on it. And we are putting 1/5 of the world's fresh water at risk so that Enbridge can take a shortcut and continue raking in billions of dollars annually.
Oh boy. Okay. Vina, there's a question that came in before the forum, and I think it's pretty interesting about, is it possible in the near future to change Boston MBTA loud and smoky diesel commuter trains to quieter electric ones? I think this is something that it sounds like Kristen feels in her own community in terms of noise pollution and actual air pollution. So can you just talk a little bit about where that stands, if the climate bill had anything to do with that? Or if that's a fight we still need to keep fighting.
Sure, thanks, Ben, and great question, something that I feel very, very strongly about. So this is an issue, that is electrification of commuter rail is an issue that we've been advocating for years. And it was really disappointing to see that the language that we had worked on with partners that would have required that the entire commuter rail system be electric by 2035 did not make it into the final bill. So it was included in the Senate version of the bill. And then when the bill went into conference committee, it got watered down, and finally it was completely removed. So this is something that we are going to take up as a priority in the next session. We have been talking with our partners, with supportive legislators, to see what are the tweaks that we can make in the language to make sure that, you know, this does not die in the next legislative session. The MBTA, unfortunately, has been dragging its feet on this issue from day one. It keeps moving from first, saying that the technology is not ready, and when we show them that the technology is ready to get there, They talk about other things like, the bridges being low enough so that the catenary wires cannot be installed to electrify the commuter rail. So they're dragging their feet on it. I would definitely say that, one way in which we can get the MBTA to sit up and listen more actively is when they hear from people who are directly impacted by the pollution, who are living across these corridors. And that goes a long way in applying pressure for faster action. I would encourage anybody on this call who is a Massachusetts resident and wants to get engaged on this issue, please reach out, and I would be happy to connect you and plug you into this campaign.
Thank you, Vina. Dave, I'm going to come back to you. Vina just mentioned legislative session coming up. It makes me wonder, we had a chat coming in about what the Texas legislature has done about the grid problem, if anything, if there's any hope in the next session. So can you just give us an update on that? Have they tried? Obviously, it's not the pro-environment majority that carries those chambers, but tell us a little bit about what's going on in the legislature. Is there any hope on that front?
Yeah, well, yeah. The hope is for long-term change. Okay, I'm sorry. The Texas legislature is a place I started in 2011 when I started my Sierra Club career walking into, and I basically walked right back out after one session and said I wouldn't do much there anymore. That's just me personally. Our team works there a lot. Cyrus Reed is our lead legislative policy analyst and lobbyist. Everything we put forward gets squashed by major energy corporations like Encore, NRG Energy, Centerpoint Energy for y'all in Minnesota, who also have to deal with them. The power they wield is vast. And for every individual citizen that submits an email or a phone call, there's 3 full-time lobbyists for just one of those companies, courting and dining, and Democrats and Republicans. It's a bipartisan problem we have here. They socialized the cost of the winter storm onto ratepayers, bailed out these big energy companies with multi-billion-dollar deals that will spread the cost out of the storm for the next 20 to 30 years. So working Texans will have to pay for that. They did nothing to invest in energy efficiency. We couldn't even get a hearing on the issue. And same goes with storage and demand response. There's a little bit more, some minor support for clean energy at the utility scale level. Tesla's got a lot of influence now in Texas. Elon Musk is very cozy with Governor Abbott. So we see some cracks in that armor, but it's never to serve everyday people. And so we'll continue to push and engage folks, but we really want to keep people focused in their own backyard and build a network across the state of local activists fighting for local change and helping each other do that in different communities. So as we push the legislature, we're pushing with a broader net and more experienced folks.
Makes perfect sense. Our awesome producer behind the scenes, Dallas, may be able to share the link to the hearing tomorrow. It was shared earlier in the chat, but I see some chats about making sure they get that. So I just want to make sure. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Okay, Christy, I wanted to come back to you. This is not off the topic, but not directly on line 5. And we have a question coming in about line 5 obviously being a priority, but have you heard about the proposed spaceport on Lake Superior near Marquette? Was Sierra Club involved in blocking this, or are they involved at all right now?
Yeah, we have a staffer in the UP Marvin who is tracking that. There might be a way to use forest easements to stop any planning of it. So it is a ridiculous use of resources and a very bad idea. Yes.
The UP, which means Upper Peninsula in Michigan
Yes.
speak, right? Okay.
Yes, that is
Got it.
correct. Upper Peninsula. So it is actually connected to Wisconsin, but it is Michigan.
Okay. Vina, this is a question for you that I think it's much more general than the climate bill in particular, but I think it's worth bringing up because it's something we all face as advocates in this space. How do you, as a transportation expert, talk to people who criticize electric vehicles, electrification of all transportation options, with the electricity argument, right? That it's coming from fossil fuel powered and power plants. How do you talk to people who bring up that kind of a criticism when you're talking about electrification?
That is a good question, and I always welcome that question because it gives me an opportunity to tell people why electric vehicles are cleaner, even if the energy comes from fossil fuels. So there have been several studies that have been done in the last decade that point out that even, with the energy coming from fossil fuels, electric vehicles are, I would say, depending on which part of the country you're based in and how much of renewable energy is already a part of the grid, electric vehicles can be up to 70% cleaner than their fossil fuel counterparts. So in the Northeast, we are lucky that we have a larger percentage of renewables within our grid. So our impact on electric vehicles is much more, positive. But in the overall question, I would say, is that while electric vehicles are an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to addressing transportation pollution, I think our larger focus should be towards making sure that more people are moving from cars to electric transit and to options like walking and biking, at least for short trips around their neighborhood, instead of hopping into their car. So I would say that is the larger question that needs to be addressed. How do we make transit more accessible, affordable, electrified, and climate resilient, so that while we do have electric vehicles and people are going to use them as needed, we reduce the number of trips that are taken by them.
Awesome. Thank you, Vina. I really benefit from hearing that answer. This is my last question that I'm going to put out, and then we'll wrap it up. Dave, you get the honors here. You had a question come in from Leona that I think is just interesting to consider. It's a perfect pivot from Vina, our expert on transportation. Are there any discussions happening now about the need for mass transit in Texas, especially between the large metro areas across the state?
Yeah, if you Google Lone Star Rail, you'll see a story that came out just yesterday. It's been a 20-year deal to get a line from Houston to College Station, where the Texas A&M Aggies are, up to Dallas. And now that it's finally gone through all these legal loopholes, eminent domain battles, and lots of other things, there's a big question whether the company is actually going to have the finances to build it. Maybe someone else will step in. That line between Houston and Dallas was touted as sort of a real key, flag post, if you will, on the moon for high-speed rail in the country. And now there's a lot of doubt around it. Airline companies have resisted this for a long time. All roads point back to organized money and their special interests and access over our elected officials in this state. So we're hopeful that there'll be more, but it's slow going, and our state is growing so fast and people are moving in, and sprawl is just a very difficult wave to try and overcome. So these energy fights are very important and they have impact globally, but locally in this state, growth, transit, equitable access to transit is the biggest problem that we're going to face, coupled with a drought, coupled with a grid problem, and these intersecting social issues. It's a good time to be here doing our work, but it's very challenging.
It is a good time to be here doing our work, and it is very challenging. I can't sum it up better than that. I want to first thank everyone who dialed in, the 142 of you who are still on, folks who watched this after the fact on Facebook or wherever else you're finding this. Thank you for your time and for just getting yourselves more informed. There are a lot of people who've supported this work for a long time on the call, whether you are a volunteer leader, a donor to the Sierra Club, a donor to the Sierra Club local chapter that you are in, whether it's one of these three or someone else or a different chapter. Thank you for all the investment of time, blood, sweat, and tears and dollars that you've given. That's how this work gets done, right? It's not just the 3 of these awesome leaders on the phone and their staffs and volunteer leaders. It's the whole community of Sierra Club, other environmental organizations, tribes, etc., that get this stuff done. So thank you all. To Christy, Vina, and Dave, thank you 3 in particular for your time and willingness to share what's going on and answer questions. I know everyone's busy. Dave's on vacation this week. Vina just got back from Turkey yesterday. Who knows what time zone Vina's body feels like it's in right now, but they really wanted to be here to share these stories with you. And Christy, as you can tell, is working incredibly hard on this work up in Michigan. So thank you to you 3. If you want to be involved in this, I'm not even sure if the link's already in there. Our awesome producer may have already sent them in, but if she hasn't, Dallas will in a second. To get involved in your chapter, to give to one of these 3 chapters or any other chapter, but please do reach out to any of the folks on this call. Reach out to your local chapter if you're compelled by this and want to figure out what's going on in your city, state, county, community, whatever the case may be. We need all of you to keep doing this hard work. So thank you very much. Be well, take care of yourselves, and we will see you on our next forum in a few months. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.